Hey, folks, and welcome back to Glenn and Adrian's Rock Talk. That's Adrian.
And there's Glenn.
And we are starting kind of a new series today. We think we're probably going to do a lot of videos like this. We're going over 5 albums apiece that we have listened to in the last week or so and want to share with you. Because we're always listening to new things. We'll probably just start doing a video like this each week. This way we can expose you to more of the music that we like that we can't necessarily always talk about in the format that we normally have, where we're generally focusing on one band, which is great, and we'll keep doing that too. But we thought we'd try this just to kind of expand things outwards a little bit. So, Adrian, do you want to start?
All right. Well, one of the albums I listened to most in the past week was actually one that I've had for a long time. It's Selling England by the Pound by Genesis, which came out in 1973. I guess it's the 5th album by Genesis. And Phil's still not singing lead on this one, except on one of the songs, More Fool Me, has him on lead vocals. Mm-hmm. And, it's just got some great songs on there, like The Cinema Show, Dancing with the Moonlit Night. And my favorite would be The Battle of Epping Forest.
Cinema Show, of course.
Yes.
One of my favorite tracks by Genesis. And of course, For the Fifth, and such great tracks. My first up here is Motorhead, Bad Magic. It was their very last album, last one that Lemmy sang on. And you can kind of tell while listening to it that he's a little bit weaker in his delivery than he has been on past records, but still pretty strong. I mean, you kind of have to listen for it. It has a great opener in Victory or Die. And had a couple other songs I really liked called Till the End, both of them kind of focusing on death and a little bit more dirge-like, I'd say. And the other one was When the Sky Comes Looking for You. And it also has a really nice cover, pretty faithful one, of Sympathy for the Devil, which seems apropos for closing the album and their career. Really good stuff. If you haven't heard it, it's another great Motorhead album. It's well worth your time. It's interesting in that Lemmy is reflecting on his death or on the end of his life coming soon.
Oh, yeah, I haven't heard that one. I've got to check that one out.
Yeah, good stuff.
My next pick would be Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moo.
Oh, yeah.
It's perhaps the most famous unofficial album by Pink Floyd. Mm-hmm. It has a number of Sid singles on it, including the rather disturbing Scream, Thy Last Scream.
Yeah.
Also has a couple tracks from the movie Zabriskie Point and earlier versions of some songs, such as Come In Number 51, Your Time Is Up, also known as Careful with That Axe, Eugene.
Right. Oh, yeah. And those first 3 singles, with Candy and a Currant Bun and Apples and Oranges, and I think it even has Arnold Lane. And it has Astronomy Domine because the U.S. version of Piper didn't have that song.
Oh.
So it was a rarity in the U.S. That's why it was on there. We were lucky enough to pick up a copy back when it was out in the mid-'80s. I don't know if it's still out there.
Get it.
Yeah, if you can find it, by all means. So my second one, this is actually kind of a new album that I just acquired, and I've come to realize there's a band I really like, but that I've ignored steadfastly for decades. I'm not sure why. They're a British UK band called Steel Eye Span, and they're kind of along the same lines as Fairport Convention, who had Sandy Denny, who I'm a big fan of. And this thing, it was $3. How could I pass it up? It was a double album, a repackaging of 2 of their most popular albums in the mid-'70s when they were at their peak. So it's called Dogs and Ferrets, and the 2 albums are Commoner's Crown and All Around My Hat. Anybody who's interested in British folk, they're basically a great folk rock group from the 70s that also folds in old traditional music or sometimes medieval stuff, but rocks it out by this point in their career. So, and you can usually find it really cheap. Like I said, it was $3. So how can you beat that? And they really do rock. I suspect that Zeppelin were listening to these guys too. Just by the by, it would have been a natural fit.
3 would be, I'm not sure of the album name. It's now known as Cacola by a band called Cack. And as far as I know, this CD, which was their only release, I think. It was originally known as CAC and not Cacola. And these are a great bunch of guys who I know nothing about, except that, I know the vocalist Gary Yoder, I think is his name, later sang with Blue Cheer. But that's all I know about the band.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true. He was lead vocalist, or one of the lead vocalists for Blue Cheer on their fifth and sixth albums, The Original Human Being and Oh Pleasant Hope in like 70 and 71. And this was before that.
This was from 69, I think.
I have a copy, a counterfeit copy of that record, because I didn't realize at the time that it was counterfeit. I only came to realize that years later. But, I mean, it plays fine, and it caused me to go out and buy that CD you just mentioned, where they had changed the name to Cacola. But I do know Gary Yoder was on there, who passed away not so long ago, by the way. Rest in peace to him. The drummer for CAC also became Randy Holden's drummer on Population 2.
Oh, okay.
Seems to be some dispute over whether it's Population 1 or Population 2, but it's the same album.
Population 2. He named it after his it just being two guys, Randy Holden, and here we go. And the one that I have actually, it says Population 2 plus 8 bonus tracks.
Yeah.
Is basically, I think, his album called Guitar God, and the drummer on this is Paul Whaley.
Well, that would have been for Guitar God.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Guitar God. Oh, yeah, Chris Lockheed. That's his name.
That's his name, Chris Lockheed.
Population 2. And it was just those two guys. That's why it was called Population 2.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, so Chris Lockheed was also the CAC drummer. So just an interesting aside there. And I happen to know those 8 bonus tracks are pretty good, because I reached out. Randy Holden in around 2000 had his own website, and you could order albums from him. So I reached out and I ordered some albums from him, and they came as CDRs, but specially packaged. He had his own artwork that he had made. It's pretty cool. Unfortunately, I can't play them anymore. They stopped working, but still, it's a cool thing to have. And I got to, converse back and forth with him a little bit, and seems like a pretty nice guy. But those tracks are great. There's some really good songs on there.
Yeah, I guess I'm more partial to the Population 2 album, but I mean, I like some. There are a lot of the songs on the Guitar God album that I like too.
Yeah, for sure. But there were some really good things on the newer stuff, which I was happy to hear. Anyway, okay, so yeah, CAC, pretty cool. Gotta love California in the 60s. So my next one is Mad Season. That's a band that came together from a grouping of different, I hate using the term grunge, but Seattle-based artists for the most part in the mid-90s. Pretty much all of them were having problems with either heroin or some other substance abuse issue that they had gone to rehab for or were struggling with. Some of them actually went on to pass away, unfortunately, of overdoses and things like that. But this band put out one great album called Above, and came out in 95. It includes Lane Staley of Alice in Chains, who did unfortunately go on to pass from an overdose. Mark Lanigan, who was the vocalist for Screaming Trees. He's actually kind of a secondary character, but he was supposed to take over for Lane. They started recording a second album, but no one had time to do it. It was a side project, so it never happened. So they've only got this one album. And he just passed away recently, but I think of more natural causes. But he had problems with addiction as well through his life. And then Barrett Martin from Screaming Trees, Mark Lanigan, but they were both in the band together at one point. Mike McCready of Pearl Jam. And the band actually started because Mike was in rehab, and he met a guy named John Baker Saunders, who was a blues bass player in the area, and he became their bass player. Those guys went on, they made this really pretty great album. There's a song on it called River of Deceit that I think is really quite good, and it's by Lane Staley, and it's about drug addiction and not being able to escape it, and knowing it's a choice and still not being able to escape it. But it just, when I was thinking about it, there's so many people that were affected by heroin right at that time in the mid 90s. For some reason, it was just a big problem in music. You have even Mike McCready, he was in an earlier band, Mother Love Bone, and their vocalist, a guy named Andy Wood, died of a heroin overdose. Other people that decade, I mean, Kurt Cobain had a bad heroin addiction. The Sublime, I forget what his name is, the main guy for Sublime, he died of heroin. Shannon Hoon of Blind Melon died of heroin. So it was just epidemic at this point.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of...
Recently, there's been the opioid problem and stuff like that. They got that on the news, and they had that on the news.
Yeah, so I'm sorry to be a bummer, but I mean, the fact is that John Baker Saunders, the bass player for this, he died shortly after, I think 99, he died. Lane Staley died in 2002. Everybody else, I mean, Mark Lanigan just passed, like I said, but it wasn't drugs, but he did live a hard drug life, I think. The other two guys are still alive. The album is definitely worth hearing. And there's a version out now with more Mark Lanigan tracks from what would have been the second album. I think they got 2 or 3 done, and that was that. And so that's on there too. Definitely worth your time.
All right. So my next one would be The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. Glenn, you actually made a tape for me a long time ago, about 30 years ago. I wanted you to record the Mothers album, live at Fillmore East, 1971. You did that. And then on the other side, there's The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, which I never heard of. And I kind of left it alone for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. But, later on, I thought I'd see what this Arthur Brown was all about. And I was not disappointed. It was very, it's just an awesome record. It started with the whole string thing and everything, and then it goes into Fire eventually, which I remember hearing like really early in life on the radio, and it was just an interesting experience hearing that song again after all these years.
I always figured you would like that record. I remember once you mentioned it, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. So my number 4 is David Bowie's Hunky Dory album. And I took this out the other day to listen to because we just did a David Bowie episode.
The Man Who Sold the World.
Man Who Sold the World. That's what it was. Yep. Which is a great album. But I mentioned 5 that I liked, and this was not on that list. I mean, 5 top Bowie albums that I think are just, they're spectacular. This one also is pretty much a top shelf album. I can't deny that, but I've never really connected with it as well as the other ones that we mentioned, which were things like Station to Station and Low, and of course Ziggy Stardust. Can't remember what else, but this one, it's really kind of more piano-based writing, so it's a little bit different from the albums around it. Rick Wakeman plays piano on it, so he's the one in Changes and etc., Life on Mars. Fantastic. It's got the Spiders from Mars guys recording on the album, but they're not really the Spiders from Mars at this point. They're really just backing musicians, and it's a different kind of project, But it is a really cool album. It's a different vibe than the other ones that I mentioned. Of course, a lot of those albums are different vibes from anything else, in his catalog or from each other. He really was able to wear different personalities like the rest of us wear clothes, just pull it out of the closet. There it is, Yeah,
he was kind of an artist. He used himself as a canvas. Saying that.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and really no holds barred in terms of what he would create. He did tend to hold on to trying to get something that was going to be commercially viable out of whatever he was doing, but he would really push the limits of what an audience would probably go for. Mm-hmm. I think all the time he was concerned about audience retention, and I know that the record company, this thing came out and the record company was like, no, we're not going to promote this record, because we just know that as soon as we start promoting you as this, you're going to change into something else because we watched you do it. We just saw you do it with The Man Who Sold the World. And then whatever that folk singer guy was that was talking about Major Tom, you know, and before that. So he's like, you're like a chameleon. We cannot put all this money in. So the thing pretty much flopped and didn't go anywhere for a year. It took the Spiders from Mars. It took Ziggy Stardust to come out before this thing finally hit the charts and became a big selling album. Because the record company was just like, bury it. No promotion, you know. Luckily, he was David Bowie. You know, other artists, that would have been the end of their career, you know. But that's how it went. That was kind of the mid-'70s, you know. The record labels would hang on to you even if you had a dog of an album, if they thought that you were probably going to get something else out that was worthwhile and would sell. So many, many bands like that, you know, Genesis, Pink Floyd, Bowie, for sure. Anyway, so that's my number 4.
All right. So my last one is one I just started listening to again not long ago. It's Todd Rundgren's Utopia. The album begins with a live performance of Utopia theme. It goes into a studio recording after about 12 or 15 minutes. It goes into a studio recording of Freak Parade. It also has the 30-minute song The Icon. I read the theme about it like a long time ago. I think it's something where there's either a device or a society or something where people are able to telepathically communicate and nobody has any secrets and nobody has to worry because everybody knows everything. Yeah,
it's both good and bad.
Yeah, there can be good and bad things about it. You know, it's just.
So this is one album I don't know much about. Now, he had a band, too, didn't he, called Utopia?
He did, yes. And a few different people in it. Yeah,
you know that one of them was Dad's roommate in Venezuela. Roger Powell was his name.
Yeah, Roger Powell. Yeah, I looked for his name. I didn't find it on the album, the Todd Rundgren's Utopia.
Yeah, he was apparently an employee of ARP Synthesizers back in...
Yes.
You know, 1970, maybe before. I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah, it's a good album.
All right, so my last one for today is Blue Oyster Cult, Agents of Fortune. And this is a record that we've talked about a little bit, kicked around the idea of featuring it on the channel. But in any case, it's the 4th album that they made. It's possibly their best record. It's pretty solid. The 3 albums that came before it are called the Black and White albums, and they're all considered classics. But this one is a little bit more commercially aimed, but not in such a way that it takes away from the music. The music is actually really good. This is the one that includes Don't Fear the Reaper. There's another great song on it I love called ETI. There's quite a number of excellent tracks on it, and it's a good listen. Probably a good entry point for Blue Oyster Cult, because it's got some of the radio-ready stuff, but also other things. And it's all genius. You know, this was a band that relied heavily on science fiction. You know, like ETI is actually about extraterrestrials.
Extraterrestrial intelligence, I think it stands for.
Yeah. So just really insane and wonderful ideas for songs. And they could riff, too. Buck Dharma on guitar could really play. So pretty cool stuff. So, yeah, I recommend that one, too.
No, it was pretty interesting, you know, trying to come up with this list, because there was also a lot of other music that I listened to. It just wouldn't fall under the category of classic rock. Michel Jarre and Philip Glass and, you know, artists like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, if anybody else has ideas on these albums or input you want to give us, by all means, leave it below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you like us in general and want to hear more of our opinions on these types of things, please subscribe. I think with that, we're going to say see you later, and we'll be back soon. And again, drop any thoughts you have on us down below, and we'll take a look. All right. Take care, folks.
See you guys later.